Hey, and welcome back to the next episode of our Guitar 101 Introduction to Beginner Guitar course. In this lesson, we are going to look at the function of chords. The prior lesson, we looked at how to understand, how to make sense of chords. Chords are the bones, they're the structure of music on guitars, and even if you're playing lead, you've got to understand the role and function of chords in the mix and how they contribute and how they provide structure for your playing. So in this episode, we're actually going to look at the act of playing chords. We're going to start with some just discussion of hand position and some physical aspects about playing chords and your fingers and this sort of thing. So we're going to start with just some discussion about the physical act of playing chords. Then we're going to apply the knowledge that we got from our last lesson into actually making sense of a chord structure and how that applies to the fretboard and how to play it. And so we're going to look at using our decoder ring of chords and actually applying it. We're going to decode the key of C together and see how these chords go together and so forth, and make sense of it. Not just know how to do it, but know why you're doing it that way. And then we're going to just look at a range of basic chords, and we're going to look at them in combination with the other chords that they go with, so that you can begin to have a foundation of understanding, well, these chords go together, these chords go together, and so forth, and be able to navigate. Especially we're talking primarily to begin with the first position chords, the so-called cowboy chords. You got to start there and work up to the various positions as you move higher and so forth. But this lesson is going to take a look at chords and now apply our understanding of chords to actually playing them. So stay tuned. With each of these videos, I like to highlight the guitar that I'm using for that video. This is a recent addition to my collection. This is a Fender Duosonic. This is an unusual guitar. It was originally conceived of as a 22.5-inch short scale student guitar by Leo Fender back in the 1950s, in the mid-50s, this along with the Music Master. And then you have the evolution of the Mustang and Jaguar, and so this got edged out of the mix in '69, and they did two reissues, one in the 90s and one in the 20-teens. And this is of the 20-teens variety. This is a 2018. Now the reason I show it to you, it's a little pricier than most of the guitars that I've been showing you, but if you're looking for a guitar that is super easy to play, now there is the Mustang line, as I mentioned, and there are Squier products with the Mustang line, but if you want a guitar that, if you want to put a little more into it up front and have a guitar that you will really grow into and not look to replace, even if you might add others into your collection, it's one that you would look to keep indefinitely, and this is one of those kind of guitars. This Duosonic is absolutely fantastic. It has a 24-inch scale along with the Mustang. It's very, very similar to the Mustang. This particular one has the humbucker and single coil with a coil split function, so it allows a lot of different tones. It's very light. It's a beautiful alderwood body. It's very light, very easy on the body, and because of that shorter 24-inch scale, the bends on it are so easy. It's almost, effortless is a hyperbole, but it's very, very easy to play this guitar. So this is a great example of, if you really want to start off with an intermediate guitar that you can really grow into, this is a fantastic choice. So let's begin this discussion of chords and playing them by some various points of advice that I would give to you in preparing to play chords and how to approach playing chords. First thing is that you do not want your tone knob really high. That is your treble control, and it is primarily there so that you can roll it back, because when you're doing a lot of chord work, it can create so much sound that it becomes overwhelming. It also, if you're not hitting any, like if one of the various notes you're hitting, you're not fretting all the way and it squawks a little, it will squawk a lot more if you have your tone rolled up than if you have it rolled back. If you have it rolled back, it's going to be a lot more mellow. Now if you're, when you grow into it, you can roll it up, because particularly real twangy music, country and so forth, the rhythm still has a fair amount of the treble mixed in it to get that twang. But to begin with, it's easier to get a good sounding chord if you have the tone rolled back. So that's point number one I would give you, is roll your tone back. And you don't want your volume cranked all the way. Generally speaking, you want your volume somewhere between 3 and 8, depending on what you're sending it through with the amp. Another thing is, particularly to start with, don't mess around with effects and distortion and things. You want a generally clean tone. Reverb is about like the only thing that, you know, is not going to dominantly change your tone. But to begin with, a little bit of reverb's fine, that sort of thing. But generally, don't get focused on the effects. Get focused on making good sounding chords first. And then you can move up to, you know, mixing in a little distortion or, you know, delay and effects and so forth, wah, and yada yada. So there's things you can do to it, but just like I've said before with clean tones, start with the clean tones, work into the heavier stuff and the distortion and that sort of thing as you get more confident with it. Another point is that now you can play with either the pickups or with them blended, but the neck pickup, generally speaking, is understood as the rhythm pickup. And so it is a good place to start. A great place to start in terms of your settings, put it on the neck pickup and roll that tone. It doesn't have to be all the way down, but play around with it. Roll that tone down until you get a nice, rich, creamy tone that, you know, sounds good. It's not giving you a lot of noise, or it's not too much. Because the problem is if, particularly if you're adding in high gain and distortion, hitting additional notes is going to start raising that level to the point that it sounds just like noise. It just goes, it just crackles and becomes a wave of noise. And so to begin with, you really want to make sure that you're making these chords nice sounding before you start playing around with all that stuff. So again, tone rolled back, neck position, that's a good place to start. Now, in terms of what you're doing with your hand, now we've talked before about doing like spider legs with your fingers. That is even more important in doing a chord, because you're going to have to do a shape with your hand, pressing multiple frets at the same time. And each time you're going to have to move the individual fingers, and so you've really got to get really so that you're just pressing the string with the tippy tip there. Now in the last lesson we're going to talk about bars, about using your finger to do an entire fret across, but we're not worrying about bars for right now. I've found that with beginners, with students, that is the most overwhelming aspect of trying to play chords, is that not only are you trying to figure out chords and figure out like what do these mean and what am I doing, and it's like, okay, well, put your first finger here and your first finger there, and then you see a bar chord and you're like, how am I supposed to get my hand around there to do that? And it's just overwhelming. So we will talk about bar, but we'll talk about it in its own lesson. Right now we're not going to use bar chords. Right now we're just focusing on playing chords and just getting into it. So the physical aspects, we talked about tone, we talked about settings on the guitar. Next thing is to use a lighter gauge pick. This will make a softer attack as you make your sweeps across your chords. It'll make it softer, which means that it's not going to be as noisy. It's not going to pop as much, and it'll create a smoother sounding chord. I generally play with heavier picks personally, but if I'm primarily focused on rhythm, I will use a lighter gauge, a thinner pick. This is a great example, and if you go back to my lesson on picks, I go through a bunch of picks. I didn't include this one. This is a big triangular flex pick by Dunlop. It's a thinner. This is a 0.5 millimeter, real thin and large and easy to sweep across all the strings. And so it's a great rhythm. This one is my wife's favorite. She really likes this style a lot, particularly because it has so much to hold on to. So you want a light gauge pick, and again, generally when you're doing a chord, you don't want a real pop hard attack on a single string. You can work up to how, where the threshold is for hard attacks, but to begin with, You just want nice soft strikes across the strings. And there are, and this becomes particularly important for rhythm work, down strokes and up strokes, so that you can, and this allows all sorts of wonderful complex rhythms. You can, and this is, I mean, I'm not showing, I'm just, here's some examples, right? And so the up and down, back and forth, and so this is a way, what is the rhythm guitarist doing? That's helpful also in understanding rhythm guitar and chord work. The rhythm guitarist is, if you imagine the drums as like the backbone of the beat, right? They are keeping everyone in time. The bass is between them and the guitar. They are connecting the rhythm to the structure of the guitar music and the chords and the key and so forth. The rhythm guitar stands between, therefore, the bassist and the lead guitar and singer. And what the rhythm guitarist is doing is, particularly, it's keeping that rhythm together along with the drummer and bass, and now it is adding to what the bass is doing. The bass is primarily going to be hitting root notes of chords and so forth, and then the rhythm guitarist is striking those chords out to fill out the music. Okay, so that's where the chord and the rhythm guitar work. That's how that mixes in to the blend of music. So what you are going to focus on, and rhythm guitar, whether you want to play lead or rhythm, you need to at least be proficient in rhythm. And in many guitar circles, the rhythm guitar is the entry point into the band to show that you have chops and that you can, keep the time and so forth. Rhythm guitar is a very, very important aspect. It doesn't get quite the level of, praise and adoration that the lead gets, but rhythm guitar is a structural element of the mix and adds a lot of flavor and is helping to maintain the structure of the music in a very dynamic fashion. So chord work and rhythm work is very, very important regardless of where you want to go with your guitar playing. It's really, really helpful to understand. So again, just quick rundown of what we've been over. Tone down, volume in the middle, neck pickup. You're making spider fingers, looking at a diagram. A diagram is going to say, put this finger on this one and this one and this one. In the next part here, we're going to talk about why all that is. But for now, just, you're making spider fingers. You are pressing these various strings down, and you are using a lighter gauge pick, or your fingers if you're finger styling, and making a long strike across the strings. Okay, so that is functionally what you are doing to play a chord. Alright, so let's talk about using that knowledge that we had for decoding. And now we're going to apply it to the key of C and see how the chords come out of understanding the key. Alright, so what we have here is our open first position. This is open strings plus first 5 frets here. Okay. And the 5th fret is just there to illustrate that it is generally repeating to the next string. So fingers on the first 4 frets is what we're dealing with here. First open position. All right. So you see all the different letters have different colors, and this fills out the fretboard. The ones with slashes are the flats or sharps, depending on the key. All right. So this is our open first position. Now you remember the key. What it does is provides for us a boundary, right? It is like the boundary of what notes are in bounds, what notes are out of bounds, and how do we make sense of that? Okay, that's what the key is providing for us. So if we look at the key of C major, all right, this is what we've primarily been focusing on to begin with because there's no flats or sharps. It is all naturals, okay? So here is the key of C major. These are all the notes that are in bounds. All right, we've talked about that before. Now, how does this help us to understand chords? Well, as we talked about in the last one, a basic chord where it doesn't say anything else, it's just a letter. So if you see C, okay, the letter C comes up as a chord. What are we talking about? We're talking about C major, which is implied. Okay, they don't write out major unless it's a longer chord with a bunch of other stuff on it. C is indicating C major. So this is the key of C major. Now what is the chord? As we talked about before, the chord is the 1, the 3, and the 5. What does that mean? If we number the various notes by following C equals 1, D equals 2, and so forth, this is what we end up with. Alright, so here is the key of C major with the numbers now. Alright, so you see the number 1 with the yellow color and where it shows up across the fretboard. Alright, now remember the key or the chord of C, a basic chord, a basic major chord, it's going to be a 1, a 3, and a 5. Okay, so what is the 1? The 1 is C. What is the 3? E. What is the 5? G. Okay, so we have the 1s, the 3s, and the 5s. Now, the other thing to note is that if you understand the key, you will also understand the 4 and the 5, which is the two chords that will go best with that key. So if you're playing in C, C is going to be your root note, and it's going to be the foundation of your chord structure. So C is going to show up all over. It's going to resolve, generally speaking, with C, with the chord of C. So what are the other two chords that will go along if you're playing in the key of C? Well, if you count it out, C, D, E, F, and G. F and G, your 4 and 5, are going to be the two associated chords that go along with C. And as you unlock keys and as you begin to understand them, right, as you move forward with this process, you will be able to recognize immediately whenever you're talking the key of what. Well, here's the 1, the 4, and the 5. And so as a rhythm guitarist, most of your work is done for you. You might also, you'll often see the 6, which is the minor. So it would be the 6th in minor. Well, let's count it out here. What's the 6th here for C? 6th is A. So A minor is the 6th. That is the relative minor. So if you're playing in C, C, F, G, and A minor are the chords, the 4 chords that are going to sound best together. Now that is not to say that there's not going to be music that mixes other things in, absolutely. But that is the structure, that is the backbone of most Western music, is going to be a 1, 4, 5, 6 combination. And so knowing that does much of the demystifying for you, in the sense that now you have the basic, why are keys what they are, and what do they do for us? Well, they give us the boundaries. They tell us what's in bounds to play, and that after you understand their relationship and the way that the keys relate to each other, which is going to be a later lesson, the circle of fifths, that there is a wheel that you will begin to unlock and understand that all of this, it's all following the same patterns, right? So if you go to another key and you count it out, you are going to find all of the basic essentials that you need by understanding what a key is, what a root note is, what a basic scale is, how these, numbering each of the notes within that key, and then saying, okay, well, here's the 1, 3, 5, that's your basic chord, and then here's 1, 4, 5, these are the 3 basic chords that you're going to play. So this is how you decode. This is how you make sense of each of these keys so that it becomes natural. Once you've worked it through your mind, you're like, oh, it's all logical. It all makes good sense. And you don't have to get a degree in it. You don't have to go super deep into it to understand these basic foundational structural issues. And that will vastly improve your guitar playing, to not just be able to play, okay, I thought this has got a C, and this has got an F, and this has got a G, and it's got an A minor. You know, just by looking at C, that you're going to expect C, F, G, A minor. Why? Because that is the structure of musical language as we in the Western system have established it. So all of this is to get your mind around, why are you playing what you're playing? And so understanding the basic structures here, and then you can apply it, and then it all begins to make sense. there's a chord progression of C. Just real basic. I just strummed it out doing finger strumming. Very, very basic, but it sounds good. It sounds good. And that's why all of this exists, is because they figured out a language to make sense of, if you play these together, it sounds good. And that's what we want, right? We want good music. So this is how to play chords, and not just play them, but understand them. Alright, so we've discussed some basics about how to make a nice sounding chord, how to play a nice sounding chord. We've talked about decoding a key to understand which chords go together and that sort of thing. So now let's talk about some just general foundations of chords, right? And so two things we want to do in this section. One, briefly talk about power chords, and then we're going to talk about cowboy chords. Now, what's a power chord? Power chord is a 5 chord, and that is to say, if you remove the 3, so you're only left with the 1 and the 5, that is what's called a power chord. Now, why is it called a power chord? It's exceedingly simple, where you're just, so for example, E5, so open E, and then I'm striking the 2nd fret of the A string. So E and then B. That is your 1 and 5. Now, why is this so endemic on guitar? Well, for one, it's easy, because you can play any note. If you are, for right now, disregarding the top 2 strings, we'll talk later in another lesson about, because there's a shift that happens with the top 2 strings, and generally power chords you see primarily focused on the bottom 4 strings, primarily the bottom 2, right? This is something that is very, very popular in rhythm work for heavy bands, partially because, I mean, it's so simple, and so they can focus on the incredibly fast playing that they're doing with the rhythm and not worry about complex shapes and so forth. It is just using your 1st and 3rd finger, and it is just any note, and then you come up and then go 2 frets over. That's a power chord. That's a E5. So, very, very simple. Very simple. And it's also popular because it is so simple. You're only striking 2 notes together, and generally speaking, you're playing lower, right? You're playing on the bottom strings, and so you can really crank up the distortion and... Oh, hello. I'm not a heavy player, but you can crank it up, and you can put a lot of distortion on it, and it will still sound good because you're only hitting 2 notes, right? It's similar to why it's rare for a bass player to play a chord. Very little of this transfers over to bass. Bass is primarily about hitting root notes and sometimes doing an arpeggio run, and that is playing through the notes of a chord, but playing them individually, right? Why? Why don't bass players do chords? Because it sounds like junk, generally speaking. You can come really high up and you can do a few chords and something, but if you're playing low on a bass and you play more than 1 note together, it's just whoa, whoa, whoa. It's just noise, right? Bass is not geared towards chords. Guitar is geared towards chords, right? The bass is primarily geared towards bass or root notes, right? Hitting the foundation, the root of the chord, and then the guitar player goes blah, 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 over the chord that bass player is going dum 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 da dum da dum, hitting that root note, right? So that's why you don't see chord work in basses, right? But it is absolutely vital to playing guitar. You've got to understand it. And so if you're on the heavier side, power chords are the absolute beginning point for heavier sounding music. You've got to get that shape very comfortable with your hand. Now, the other thing I want to talk about right now is cowboy chords. That is to say, the chords that you play in first position. I think the association is with old acoustic guitars, and like the mental association is somebody on the range with the cows in the fields, and they're sitting at the campfire and they're singing, some old song about being cowboys. That's what we mean by cowboy chords, right? But the reality is, and the shredders and the like, I'm so great, the virtuosos out there are gonna poo-poo this, but the reality is most rhythm work can be achieved in first position. It's just the reality of it, right? You don't need to come up and be fancy with rhythm work. It sounds great up in first position, and that's one of the various reasons why rhythm work is kind of like the entryway into the band. It is the entry point for the guitar, because you can sound perfectly fine in first position. You don't have to be fancy. In fact, it is not the job of the rhythm guitarist to be fancy. That is the job of the lead guitarist, right, and potentially the singer. The rhythm guitarist is again providing that bridge between the rhythm of the bass and drums and the melodies and harmonies of the guitar and singer, and putting them together and adding additional substance and structure there to the music. That's the job of the rhythm guitarist, not to be fancy and to show off, I know what an add 9/13 flat is. Who cares, right? Can you hit the chords of the structure of the music in time? That is what rhythm guitar work is about. It is not about being fancy. It's about being just good at the chords that you're playing. So with that in mind, cowboy chords are a absolute essential to rhythm guitar, playing these chords in first position. And as we talked about, so like, for example, we were doing C, right? So you've got C, you've got F, you've got G, and then you got A minor, right? Those are your 1, 4, 5, 6, right? So knowing the 1, 4, 5, and 6 minor, the relative minor of any key, is really essential. It gets you in the door and gives you all the basics of what you need in order to play that, the basics of the music, right? You don't need to know all of the really elaborate ways that chords can be modified to get the basic structure of chords and to get into rhythm work. And all of that is icing and extra flavor and stuff. Start by getting good at the basic chords. Then you can throw stuff in. And one of the ways that you can make basic chords sound better is by doing what's called hammer-ons and pull-offs as you're playing the chord, where you see, I'm just hacking around, but you see, as I'm running through some chords, I'm putting my fingers, pulling them off, and hammering them on. That it means to strike a note hard enough that you hear, you continue to play the chord, or you continue to play the note. That's a hammer on or pull off, right? A way that you can make that even a basic chord sound more flavorful is by throwing in some hammer-ons and pull-offs. And that is just something that comes with practice, with experience, and with familiarity, because you're not having to think, oh, I need to, okay, this one needs to be on this. You've gotten, like, I'm doing a D shape right now, basic D chord, top 4 strings, starting with the D string, then 2, 3, 2. So basic D shape, and I can play around with it. I can play around with the notes that I'm hammering on, pulling off as I'm going through it, and that sort of thing. That's a way to add flavor to your chords. Now, the best way to learn these chords is to, there's a million different products out there, but get a chord sheet, whether it's on your phone or in a physical form. I really enjoy, personally, Ultimate Guitar. It is an absolutely fantastic app that has all sorts of stuff in it. One of the things that it has in it is a complete chord library, but I know there's 1,000 apps and various things out there, but get one of these and then you can just start to work through it. Now, I would say this is very important. Practice the chords together, as in, again, the 1, 4, 5, 6s that we've been talking about. When you're doing your practice, work on those together so that it forms that muscle memory that you know how to maneuver between these chords that are nearby, so you don't have to think about it. You can just roll with it. So that's like D shape. I know if I move up 2, that's an E. So as you're playing with it and as you're learning it, the reality is that there's so much to learn, but it all starts with the essentials. It all starts with the basics. And learning these shapes, the cool thing is, particularly the more that you fret, right? So like what I just did there with the D, I know that's, you know, either going to be a D sharp or E flat. I know that's an E. There's an F, right? Because I know that that shape, these 3 notes together, are a chord shape. And I can move it, and I get new chords out of it. I mean, this is where you get into the guitar is so much fun. Oh my gosh, it's so much fun. It's so much fun to explore. Start with those basics. I know there's a lot of talk about like the cage system. I've looked at those. It hasn't ever, like, it hasn't stuck with me. What I like to think about is just patterns and shapes, and then, you know, freely moving around. A lot of the shapes, like, you know, for example, here's a G. A G is 3 2 0 0 0 3, and you can also fret the 3rd on the B string. So anyway, so that's a G. Now here's the easiest chord to play. If you play those 3 strings together, you're talking B, D, or B, G, D, right? 2 3 4. Okay, that's actually G. That's a G chord. Those 3 notes right there. You can play an open, right? And when you play an A, you're just doing that same thing, but it's up 2 frets. So an A shape is actually, if you really are being serious about it, is coming from the G shape, because it's this, but now it's here. It's just those 3 open strings moved up 2. So that tells you that you can slide on those 3 strings anywhere, and you have a chord the whole way you're sliding on those 3 strings. Stuff like that. That's why I don't like the caged in these systems about, like, it's too defining to me, and I'm having to think too much, versus just, you know, when you learn these shapes and play around with it, you get more and more comfortable with it, and you realize, hey, you know, this is another essential aspect to all of this, is that you do not have to play all of the notes in a shape to still get cool sound. So this, for example, these are my 2 highest strings played on 3 and 2. That is part of the D shape, but it is just the top 2 strings. And sometimes you don't want all 6 strings. You can get some super cool sound by making a partial chord shape and then sliding it around within the key. There's so much you can do with that. But if you're just focused on memorizing shapes, it can get you know, honestly kind of boring and so forth. But what you want to do is learn these basics together, right? Go through, and as you're, you know, as you're starting to explore the different keys. So for example, G has 1 sharp. That is F sharp. G's got 1 sharp in it. All right, and so you know that if you count it out, the various doing the decoding, you know how to count out so that G, C, and D are going to be your 1, 4, 5, and then E is going to be your 6, your relative minor. So you can count these out, and you can learn, okay, so G, C, D, E minor all go together. Start playing those and switch it around between them, so that you can, again, every time you switch chord shapes, and if you can just practice and just go back and forth switching these chord shapes. Try hammering on. That was Jimi Hendrix, one of my absolute favorites. One of his great traits, one of the ways that distinguished his music, is he had a tendency to add a lot of great rhythm work into his lead and do a lot of hammer-ons and pull-offs. Na 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 na, right? As he hits a chord shape, he goes na 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 na, with, you know, just a finger moving up or down a string and hitting a couple frets. So much flavor and just awesomeness, right? But the way to get there is first to start off with all of your basics and learn them in combination with each other. All of your basic chords, and learn them in combination so you know the 1, 4, 5 relative minor sixth. And as you do that, it will solidify in your mind, and then when you pick up a piece of music or you go to a jam session and they say, hey, we're playing in the key of D, you know what's up. And you can, okay, well, I know which chords are going on, so you can hear, okay, I see that's okay. It starts to make sense that you don't just know, okay, if I put this position on, if I hit these strings, it's a D. You know what is happening with D and its relationship to other chords. As always, if this has been helpful to you, if you enjoy my videos, please like and subscribe. Building the channel, really enjoying this time with y'all, and you have a wonderful day.